Welcome to On Your Own Terms. I'm Patty Talbot, and this is a place where we learn together what it takes to change the world on our own terms and in our own special way. My work is all about celebrating, supporting, and cultivating changemakers like you and like the special guests that we have on our show many of the weeks that we are together. Today, I have the special privilege of having with me a new friend, Thomasina Williams. And Thomasina's work is very interesting to me because I actually have a little bit of a family business myself, and she specializes in helping families that are in business together work on the family as well as the business. It's quite fascinating work and quite important work in the world when families aspire to having a functional business that sustains them as a family over sometimes many generations. Thank you.
I am a product of the 60s. I grew up in the 60s in the segregated South during the height of the Civil Rights Movement in a very nurturing community that was primarily my family. My grandparents were significant landowners. They owned citrus groves. I live in Central Florida, grew up in Central Florida, and the area where I grew up is not that far from Disney World. And frankly, before Disney, Central Florida was primarily citrus groves. My grandparents had lots of land, and they also had 8 children. And as part of them helping to get their 8 children started, they gave each of them a parcel of land for their new homestead and their home. So most of my entire block, my community, actually were my family members. My grandparents were so prominent in our community that actually, not when I was growing up, but later, the city named the entire community after my grandparents, Wes and Gussie Bellamy. So I grew up in Bellamy Park Heights. The park comes from the fact that my grandparents made sure that there was land for the city to put a park in what to this day is still the only park in the predominantly Black part of town of a primarily white community. So it was a very nurturing community. My grandparents were people of very strong faith. They believed in faith, in family, in community service and community as 2 different concepts. They also had a very, very strong work ethic and believed in equity, that merit was very important, that people needed to earn their way. So for example, when my brothers in high school worked in the orange groves with the other laborers that my grandfather hired, he paid them, my brothers and cousins, the same as what he paid the adult men. So again, family, faith, actually faith, I would say, was probably first, community, service, and hard work. I grew up watching Walter Cronkite. Back in the days when we only had 3 television channels that were black and white, and television went off when the sun went down. And I remember as a child, a 5-year-old child, watching the debates on the evening news around the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the implications of those 2 pieces of landmark legislation. The Voting Rights Act was in 1965 and the Civil Rights Act in 1964. And to my 5-year-old child's mind, it seemed like all of the people that Walter Cronkite interviewed on the evening news were lawyers who were in the legislature, who were in the US Senate, making decisions that would impact people's lives. And from watching the debate around civil rights legislation is when I decided as a child, there are no women in this legislative body, and there are no Black people in this legislative body. And what I want to do is be one of those people who's in the room helping to make the decisions. And so that informed my going to law school and my commitment to be of service as a lawyer in the work that I did. I didn't know as a child that you can't really make any money as a civil rights lawyer, certainly not enough to pay off the very expensive student loans I had accumulated. So I clerked for a federal appellate judge, which is just one level below the US Supreme Court. And then I had an opportunity to go to Miami become a partner in a very substantial firm in just 3 years. And one of the things that enabled me to do is to use the resources of the large firm to do a lot of pro bono work. I stayed at the firm for 7 years, and I needed something to keep my creative juices flowing. So I actually started my own law firm, which happened to have been the first Black-owned law firm in Miami that had a focus on a corporate clientele. And while my corporate clients actually kept the place open and paid the staff, the work that was near and dear to my heart, I was able to continue in the area of voting rights and did some work on some landmark voting rights legislation, not only in Miami-Dade County, which is where I was practicing at the time, but that had an impact statewide. Actually, I represented the plaintiffs and got a chance to draw the first single member districts in 1993 in Miami-Dade County. And what that did was to ensure that there was representation of Black voters, and in Miami, at the time we said Hispanic voters or Latino voters, rather than the voting mechanism being controlled predominantly by the white population. No Black commissioner and no Hispanic commissioner had been able to win an election prior to that time because of the fact that it was an at-large election. If you lived in a predominantly Black community, as my client did, won 96% of the vote in your community, you still could not get elected, because the coalition of the white voters who lived someplace else, Miami-Dade County actually is one of the largest geographic land masses of a county in the country. And so somebody on the other side of the county could prevent you from electing the people who lived in your neighborhood. And the litigation that I was privileged to work on and then actually draw the first set of lines for was part of my community service, my pro bono work, giving back as it was that I've been taught to do by my grandparents and my parents. That issue of voting rights, of public policy advocacy, is one that is still near and dear to my heart. I actually left the practice of law after almost 20 years to go to the Ford Foundation, moved to New York from Miami to be their global strategist on voting rights and public policy advocacy, getting local communities understanding the importance of claiming their voice as their political power and getting engaged in voting and in public policy making volunteer basis. I serve on the advisory board of an organization called Advancement Project, which is based in Washington, D.C., and does advocacy around voting rights, around school reform, around issues like disrupting the classroom to prison pipeline in low-income communities, and also working on reform issues around the increasing number of young women who are ending up in prison. So roots from the 60s still is actually serving me today in that regard. I would say that the second issue that is near and dear to my heart and has become not only a personal passion, but also a professional mission is supporting families, and particularly families who own businesses. My grandparents, as I said, were significant landowners when I was growing up. And unfortunately, the second generation, my mom's generation, her and her 7 siblings, were not able to build on that phenomenal foundation that my grandparents laid for them. And I was doing some research a number of years ago and came across a study that looked at why is it that families lose their wealth across generations. I learned about a phenomena called shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And essentially what that means is that, at least historically, before we got .coms and stock options, historically, the way that you built wealth in this country was to start a business. The first generation, sometimes literally, but certainly metaphorically, rolled up their shirt sleeves and got busy in a business. And inevitably, family members worked in that business. And the founder was then able to create a very comfortable lifestyle for his generation, as well as for his or her children. children, second generation, grows up, has a very comfortable lifestyle. And if families are not very intentional, very purposeful, and consistent in instilling in the third generation the values that led to the wealth, and appreciation of what it takes not only to make the wealth, but then how do you hold on to it and how do you grow it as the family continues to expand and grow from generation to generation. The research shows that 70% of families end up losing their wealth during generational transition. And I was like, oh my God, 70%? And not only that, it's not a US phenomena. It's a global phenomena, and there's some version of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in virtually every corner of the globe, whether it be clog to clogs, stable to stable, there's some iteration of it. And I was fascinated by that, one, because it is such a widespread phenomena. It meant that it wasn't just my family that was having challenges with these issues, but that most families have challenges. And so I started researching and digging more, and I discovered there's an entire field of professionals, an emerging field, but a field nonetheless, of people who can help families like mine to course correct or to avoid that fate in the first place. And so I set out on my third career to be an advisor to families, again, so that I could help my own family to course correct, as well as to help other families avoid the fate that had befallen my family. And so family businesses are a huge passion of mine. Families are obviously the cornerstone of our society. And while people tend to think of family businesses as, quote, mom and pop shops, the reality is that family businesses are also the bedrock of our economies. In the United States, family-owned businesses account for almost 60% of private sector jobs. 60%, and 54% of GDP, of gross domestic product. That means that family businesses are a huge part of our economy. If you get rid of family businesses, if family businesses are not able to figure out how to make it work, not only do we end up fracturing families, we also end up frankly, losing the family wealth and the resources that those families make available to their local communities and to communities writ large. There have been some interesting studies done which show that the buying public is actually willing to pay more for goods and services if they know that the company producing those goods and services is a family-owned business. So people have this interesting, oh, mom and pop, when I tell people what I do, they kind of like roll their eyes and think about dysfunction and challenges. But at the same time, there's this innate, I think, appreciation for the value of what family businesses do in local communities. Like my grandparents provided a park so that kids had a place to play other than their grandkids. There are all kinds of contributions that family businesses make in local communities. And even though I talk about the statistics around the contributions of family businesses, the work that I do is around leadership development within families, the individual and collective leadership development. So I focus on families who own businesses, as opposed to family businesses. Operations may be a part of the work that we do at some point if there are family members who are working in the business, but there are lots of family members who own businesses that they don't work in. And so it's not about the operations. It's really about understanding that who you are is your most precious asset. And how do we instill in people a sense of self-worth? And our society, because it is so materialistic and so focused around money, people can actually have significant challenges around talking about money. There's a 2018 survey of something like 3,200 people, I think, which said that people would rather talk to their adult children about sex, about drugs, about any and everything except money. Yet, if we don't talk to our children about money, how can we expect them to be responsible in managing and being good stewards of those resources? So the work that I do, I am privileged to do with a wide array of families. One of the current projects that I'm working on is something I call the FEW. And FEW is an acronym for Family Enterprise Women. It is an emerging community that includes a combination of online training about the unique challenges that families who combine family and business have that other families don't. And it also includes coaching, both group coaching and one-on-one coaching in a community context. And it's specifically for women. Why? Because while families are the bedrock of our societies, women are still essentially the core of most families and the glue that are holding the family together, whether they work in the business or not, whether they own part of the business or not. They are still raising the next generation and have tremendous influence in what happens within families. And so that's why I'm focusing on women in particular. I was finding examples of women who wanted to do the work with their family on this leadership development, whereas the husband didn't want to do it. And so the family didn't do it because the wife didn't want to push that issue, because this work requires engagement of the individuals. It's not me imparting some great wisdom as the all-knowing, all-seeing expert, kind of like how I did as a lawyer. It is the reverse. And so if people don't want to do it, it's not going to be impactful. By the same token, I was also finding cases where there were young women in the second generation who were working in the business, were considered to be the heir apparent by their mothers, who were the founder of the family business. And the mothers would say, oh, this sounds great. Yes, we should do that, but never quite got around to actually doing it. And so those young women also did not have an opportunity to benefit from the leadership development work that I do with families individually and collectively. And so I decided I needed to create a service offering for these women. And that is why I created the FEW. I added the community aspect because there are so many women who feel like they're kind of on this journey by themselves. In our society, we're taught you don't, quote, air dirty laundry. At least that's what we were taught in the South. You don't talk about family challenges. And so people tend not to. And when these women are going to organizations that are focused on just women, they're not finding lots of women who are also in the situation of being in a family that owns shared assets. And if they happen to work in the business and are going to business-oriented professional or trade associations, they're not finding any conversation about what do you do with these challenges when you also happen to work with or own your business with a family member. So there's this void, and the goal is for the FEW, family enterprise women, to fill that void. One story that really touched me, I spoke on a panel at a conference of women entrepreneurs. It's an organization called Enterprising Women. They have a magazine as well. And I come off the dais, it was a panel actually of 4 women. This woman walks up to me and asks me, can she speak to me? And I said, of course. So she kind of asked me to, step to the side. And she just was tear-filled eyes. She said, you're the first person I've been able to talk to about the challenges I have in my business with my husband. And my heart went out to her. What was so ironic about that is she said I was the first person she'd been able to talk to. She and I hadn't had a conversation. She simply heard me talking from the dais and recognized that I understood what she was going through and that she didn't have anyone else to talk with. Part of my story of my prior life as a lawyer and my interest in working with family businesses, I left the very large law firm, as I said, and started my own firm. And I have a brother who worked with me in my law firm for a period of time. So I have a very real sense of what it is to work with family. And today, part of what my family, my mom, my brothers, and I are doing to help our family course correct is we've started a real estate development company. So I am kind of my idea to start this. So, and I'm the oldest, I should add, 3 younger brothers. So even today, I am part of a family that owns a business that we are actively working together on how do we make these decisions when I think we should go right and somebody else thinks we should go left. And then a third person says, no, we should stand still. And then you got a fourth over there saying, well, what about moving ahead in this direction? Families need to learn how to work together to resolve those kinds of challenges, because unlike other families, it's not just a question of people not seeing things the same way. Your financial wherewithal, your economic foundation is also at stake if you can't figure out how to work through your differences. So the work in general that I do with families is a part of that. And then this new program of Family Enterprise Women is an additional way to try to help to make a difference in the world in that regard. I would just add that one other important element for me about the FEW is that it's my attempt to do what I call democratize the family advising space. Most people I meet have no clue that my work exists. When people think about building generational wealth, they think about making money, wealth management. And since I happen to have worked at a very large bank at one point, I was the first person at Wells Fargo Private Bank hired to come in-house to do the work that I do with their ultra high net worth families. And so people think it's about the money. No, I never managed money at the bank. And then people also think, well, we just need to set up a trust to protect everything and have a goodwill and all of the kinds of asset protection strategies you do. I practice law, but no, I don't do any of that kind of work. And it's not just about the legal structures. There's a third piece. In addition to maximizing the financial wealth and doing what people can to capitalize on their estate planning, they also need to figure out how to optimize their individual and collective family relationships. That is the key long term. Because as that saying goes, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, that essentially means that you can have the best structures you want. I tell people all the time, the mere fact that you have a trust doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have conflict. One of the fastest growing areas of litigation in the United States for the last 10 plus years has been probate litigation. Probate litigation is litigation over trust, over wills, over what happens when someone doesn't leave a will or doesn't have a trust. So the documentation in and of itself doesn't mean a lot if the people who are the beneficiaries and the owners of those resources haven't figured out how to navigate their challenges and avoid litigation and costly disputes that, again, rupture the family, as well as putting their financial resources at risk. I grew up in the segregated South in the 60s. I actually integrated my elementary school. I was the first Black girl to graduate from my private high school. I do work now with very wealthy people. Frankly, I have always been in different worlds. I've always had to deal with this issue of what you refer to as patchwork world. I have a friend who's always curious about, how do you know that person? Where did you meet that person? He teases me about having such an eclectic collection of friends and acquaintances. I know people who grew up in housing projects to people who run $500 million a year companies and everything in between. So patchwork is kind of just a part of my existence and who I am, how I walk in the world. I have been delighted that, well, of course, I've had challenges, people underestimating me because I am a woman, underestimating me because I am Black, the two of those. And people also oftentimes think, thanks to my mom and my dad and their genes, think that I'm younger than I am. So right there, a lot of people would say that's three strikes against me. Frankly, I've been able to hold my own. That's a combination of my contribution, but there are also people who were receptive, who were open and gave me the opportunity to show what I could actually do, which a lot of people didn't have that opportunity. I was led to this work, I think, because of my family history. And it's kind of part of my, as I said, personal passion now, professional mission to figure out how to bridge these gaps. Coming into that world, I don't know any other Black women in the United States who are doing that work. And I haven't met any other Black men either who are doing that work. But I found my way in and found people very open and very welcoming and very supportive, being able to, for example, be the first person that Wells Fargo Private Bank hired to come in-house and build a whole new team doing this work for their ultra high net worth families is because of that opportunity to deal in the patchwork world, to be able to offer my contributions that helps to leverage and support what other people are trying to do as well. Giving as much as I'm getting has been my experience. That's how I live my life. That's how I walk in the world. That's how my people, as we say, raised me. And so it's not so much surprise as I would say delight that there are lots of good people in the world. You know, we just had a couple of horrific shootings in our country very recently as we're having this conversation. And I literally get goosebumps just thinking about that. Poor kids, other people gunned down just because they happen to look like me and be Black. Despite all of that kind of negativity in our society, in our world, I believe that fundamentally, most people are good people at heart and want the same thing for their families that I want for my family and that you likely want for your family. The challenge is we don't have many opportunities to get to know each other at that level. And we have all kinds of stereotypes and assumptions we make about people. So the question of diversity for me is one of just being who I am and putting out into the world that which I want to receive from the world. I love the name that you've given to your podcast of On Your Own Terms. The way that I think about that is, yes, I want to do this on my own terms. I think most people want to do whatever it is they want to do in the world on their own terms. And the lesson that I think we still need to learn as a society is that we can't do it on our own terms, but not on our own. We need each other. Sankofa is actually a West African term from the Akan people, primarily in the Ghana region of West Africa. And Sankofa is a mythical bird that's historically depicted with its feet that are facing forwards, its head is turned backwards, and it has an egg in its mouth. And what that means as it relates to my work with families is here we are today, firmly planted in the present. As we look back and draw lessons from the past, to give birth to new possibilities in the future.
Thank you so much, Thomasina. Next week,
I hope you'll reach out to Thomasina via LinkedIn at Thomasina H. Williams or via her website at SankofaLegacyAdvisors.com.
Next week on Your Own Terms, we're going to have another special friend of mine here, Harriet Stein, who is a specialist in teaching mindfulness. I can't wait for you to meet Harriet and learn about her change-making work in the world. In the meantime, may you be grounded in your own beingness. May you be guided in your doingness in the world. May you be generous in the ways that you connect with diverse others. And may you be inspired in your reflectiveness so you can change the world on your own terms. I'm Patty Talbot. I'm always learning, and I'll bet you are too.